Recording in progress.
Well, welcome everyone. It's 11:40. We're going to go kick off our pre-commission agenda. I don't have anything at this time. Housekeeping items at the commission. Commissioner Hanson.
Yes, just a couple things. I was reminded at school that school is starting, and then I was in Barber Valley, and they are like, school is starting, and they're going to have a new school. So I'm at this reference. First thing, the Sage School, I know the request was put in to adjust the timing of the light on Mallard and Park Center, because there's so many kids across at that, and it's not long enough. So if we could get that before school starts, that would be great. I don't know where that is in the process of evaluation, adjusting the time of the light. And then in Harris Ranch, the neighborhood has some requests which will be coming, but the school is not quite ready to be opened, but it will be opened in the winter. And typically, since it's a chip seal season next year, so we actually ought to be doing like we did in the chip seal zone this year. We may need to do in anticipation of the school opening, because the whole dynamic of children moving, it's a walkable, bikeable school, the whole design of it. And so crossing the streets, the lines, one, which I think is excellent, instead of having a dashed line, is to have a full, because with a dashed line, that's kind of like permission to pass. I think there's also some speed limit requests. So those are things I think that are real important in anticipation of school. Those are the two school things. I had some questions about the contract that we're going to vote on, but I to the general on the regular agenda, so I won't mention that. Anyway, it's great. Those are I just wanted to be I know it's now August, but school's starting.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder. And I do want to share too, I really want to give a shout out to our team members that participated and went out to neighborhood night out. I went to several yesterday, and it was I just so enjoyed watching them interact with the public, learning the pilot project that's working itself out at Central Rim, in partnership with the city of Boise, just trying to manage and monitor the whole leaf gutter water treatment situation there. That was just really exciting. And just thought that we had some genuine conversations with our community members about what we do, why it matters. And there was like my ignorance is showing because I didn't grow up with television, but like the wheel that you spin to answer questions and the trivia, there was some great educational components with those activities. So just wanted to give a big shout out to our team that did that. Any other housekeeping? Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Last night's national participate, because we had a little disaster home, but I'd been plumbing. I'd been preparing to, because in one particular section of town, Saguaro Ridge, I think is what it's called, there's apparently a whole lot of uproar over the fiber optic installations again. And so I gave them a little direction how they ought to approach it. And so you should be seeing pretty soon.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldthorpe. And Commissioner Hanson.
Yes, I forgot. It seems like a long time ago, but it was actually last Thursday. Fantastic event, the ribbon cutting on Kootenai. I thought it was beautifully put together. It was a wonderful demonstration of the neighborhood was so engaged in it. The staff was engaged in it. And it shows you that a street through a neighborhood is more than just a street through a neighborhood. It's a place people live. It makes a huge difference. And and then, of course, they demonstrated that with a dance. And I just thought that was really good, and it was a good reminder that while we tend to approach things of cars moving through a neighborhood on a street, it is 10 times more to the people who live there and who go to school and go to church, and it was at the church there on Roosevelt. So I thought that it was brilliantly put together, and I really, really appreciate all the work that Shandy, you and your team did in putting together the event last Thursday.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, are there any questions on today's agenda? Or any requests?
I think there's a request from the public to put the capital improvements plan professional services agreement on a regular
There is.
agenda.
Yeah, I wanted to see if that was something that the commission wanted to make that request, which I'm happy to.
Oh, I'm fine doing it. Comments on it.
That
So.
sounds fine. All right, so we'll do that then. All right, Director, over to you.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioners. Good morning. Couple things. First off, next week, Wednesday, we'd ask you wear red. We are celebrating. We're in collaboration, our communications team with Meridian, Boise, different cities on Stop on Red celebrations when it comes down to back to school. Commissioner Hanson, could you give me the name of that school, that first one you talked about again, because we haven't seen that, the request on timing?
Yes, so Sage, right there. is
Sage? Got it, okay.
Busy Arterial Park
Right.
Center, and the intersection's Mallard, and the timing of the crosswalk is not enough for the kids when they go across to get all the way across. It's a long distance. If we could get that adjusted in time for school opening.
Okay, no, we
Great.
will take care of that going forward. Commissioners, again, long-range planning, August 26th is a National Women's Equality Day and Equity Day. We'll be doing celebrations here. We'll keep you posted, but that will be a big day here at the district. A couple technical things before I get into last week's second budget adjustment decisions that you made. First off, we have with 3 months remaining in the fiscal year, we've only had 7 insurance claims totaling $13,000. We will have an 8th coming forward. We will be purchasing a vehicle for an individual. One of our vehicles totaled here recently. It's a 2011. Impact fee collections continue not to meet expectations of last year. They're about 21% behind last year, about $4 million behind. That's why we asked to lower our expectations for what was going to occur for the end of the year. Very happy to let you know that we've had only 2 work-related personnel injuries year-to-date so far, which is absolutely phenomenal, and only 4 year-to-date vehicle accidents, which is absolutely tremendous across the board. And the team member retention rate at ACC right now is holding at 96%, which again is truly great. I know I probably laud this too many times, but your rapid implementation team from DTS currently has accomplished 83 rapid projects and has 74 right now in either development or execution. Again, this was part of our Accelerate Innovation or Lose. It is a huge success across the board, and all the other divisions are doing great when it comes down to that. Commissioners, you may have noticed on the director's report that I labeled this as an action item for you all. And the reason I did that, Commissioner Pickering and I had a good discussion on this last week and such. As you recall, this paper I put in front of you that showed the staff's intent and request for the second budget adjustment was to include those 3 additional FTEs that I talked about in, I think it was June and then in early July. Lead worker for the signal crew, accounting specialist, and network operations coordinator. I presented all the rationale, this sort of stuff. However, and again, the intent was to have you understand that this was part of the second budget adjustment. I was not comfortable with the presentation. We as an organization did not remind you when you were making those determinations that these were was an intent from us to ask you to approve these FTEs with the second budget adjustment. So what I want to do is bring that back in front of you formally during the director's report, again, action item, and again, ask that you approve the 3 FTEs as we've noted before, so there's no perception on anybody's part. I didn't want any, how do I say this? I didn't want anything being maybe, kind of put here and surprise you later. So that's my request for the lead worker at the signal construction crew. The rationale is obvious. We are doing so much right now, and we have a lead worker that we've selected. However, I can't pull them off the crew specifically because of all the work they're doing. So we're asking to have that formalized across the board. Counting specialist, as Commissioner Goldthorpe, Commissioner Hanson know, we've more than tripled the amount of things our accounting team is doing since we started back. And with the new regulations that we're required to do from budgeting and for reviews and inspections, we really need that accountant specialist to be put into the operation. Finally, the network operations coordinator with the hundreds and hundreds of licenses that we deal with on a daily basis right now, and the changing environment when it comes down to information technology and all the different things that we're having to do, not only to protect the system, but maintain the system's viability. We're asking for that FTE also. So I did not want this to be something that, sort of thing. So I wanted to, again, formally in front of you for your okay or not okay.
Is that it? Is that it for your, okay, perfect. Commissioners, questions for the director? Or do we want to make a motion? Commissioner Hanson?
That makes sense. Sometimes things get lost in the shuffle. So these are 3 positions we should have also clarified we were approving when we approved the second budget adjustment on July 26th. So I just want to make the motion that it is the intent of the commission that these 3 positions be included in the approval of the second budget adjustment.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Commissioner McKinney? Oh, sorry. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, and I stand for any questions. If you have any, you have 6 minutes.
Yep, thank you. It doesn't look like we do have any questions for you, so we'll be at ease until noon. Thank you. now 12 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone in person and online. Please join us in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
so much. All right, the first order of business is to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Madam President, just wanted to clarify, I think there's a request to move item 2 from the consent agenda to the regular agenda.
We can do that when we're approving the consent agenda.
So when we approve the agenda, I would make a motion to approve the agenda and moving that from consent to the regular agenda.
Sounds good.
Good, you make that, then I'll second it.
It's been, so I think Commissioner, you're comfortable just making that motion?
Yep.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded by Commissioner Gold, to move item number 2 on the consent agenda to number 2 on the regular agenda. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next order of business is to adopt the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are considered routine and are action items unless otherwise noted. The consent agenda is enacted by one motion. There is no separate discussion on items on the consent agenda. If a commissioner or citizen would like, they may request any item be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. We've addressed those requests, so I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So I'll move to approve the consent agenda, which are items 1 and 3 on the printed consent agenda.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Jump the gun.
Perfect. So moving on to the regular agenda, the first item is the subdivision improvement agreement for East Starview Drive improvements. Welcome, Ms. Christie.
And Commissioners, for the record, Christy Little, Development Services Manager. So this is on the regular agenda as requested by the commission. I kind of put it this way. At the commission meeting 2 weeks ago, the commission outlined what it is you all were looking for. Mr. Price looked at me and said, is 2 weeks enough? And I said, sure, because that was 2 weeks enough for my schedule. But I didn't look to my right to Mr. Tate, who had family vacation planned for last week. So this is to allow us more time for the developer to work with the contractor. I did notify the Warm Springs Neighborhood Association president, and she said, well, 2 weeks seemed kind of short to me, so we're okay with this. I also let Mr. Binion know because we called him out in the meeting and asked for his expertise and review, and he said, this actually works better for me too, because he was out of town. So staff request deferral for 2 additional weeks, and then we'll be back before you on the regular agenda.
Thank you, Christy. And I think there was a question too about connecting with the school district as well. Is that going to be happening in the next few weeks if this is?
Madam President, that will be happening as soon as we kind of get through our draft.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, commissioners.
So, yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the school district is okay with allowing for some adjustment of bus schedules so that we could start earlier. That would be great because it's a tight time frame.
Is so, Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, as soon as we kind of get through our first steps, we will engage them quickly.
Super. So with that, I would move to defer the subdivision improvement agreement for 2 weeks.
Is that enough, Christy?
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? I just want to say thank you, Christy, for your leadership in fostering these conversations, and thank you to our partners that might be online or be tuning in after. We really appreciate the collaborative nature of coming to an agreement for this agreement. Okay.
Thank you.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, then moving on to item number 2, which was the professional services agreement for 2025 capital improvement plan update. That was on the consent agenda, is now on the regular agenda. Director, is there is Edison here? Oh, Edison, just to be on deck. But Commissioner Hanson, did you have some specific questions that you wanted to start off with?
So, and they're not necessarily questions. I just, and I wasn't planning to move this off of the consent agenda until someone requested it. But I just wanted I wanted to say thank you for incorporating in the language of the professional services agreement an analysis on the front end that would include all of our policies, including the Livable Streets design policy, that it would include more engagement by the commission, which is good. I really hope that the consultant engages the commission and gets input directly from the commission and the people we represent going into it. And share, because it talks about best practices. My concern arose later on when it looked like just the tasks, especially task B, roadway needs analysis, and task C, intersection needs analysis, looked like they were just sort of added on from previous type consulting agreements, which then it just sort of, we're going to do all this stuff to analyze whether the approach we've been taking is good, but then still do the approach we've always been taking. So it just felt like when I was looking at it, like it was the first part wasn't really fully integrated in the second part, but I think that can be addressed by early engagement by the consultant with the commission. The second thing is this, because it mentions feedback to the staff, to the Impact Fee Committee, which is called the CICAC, but I just call it Impact Fee Advisory Committee, and the commission. But the CICAC committee rarely meets, and my observation is that they're dependent completely on staff information for their discussion, and we really haven't taken advantage of their expertise. That it's important that the commission prioritize improvements to that committee to make it truly advisory, like our other advisory committees, and not just a perfunctory statutory committee that we've created in order to meet the statutory requirements. So I would ask, as we move forward, for the consultant to really take advantage of the expertise that's on that committee and could be on that committee, that we move forward in making the improvements, which we didn't make when we made earlier. We for a variety of reasons. And that it needs to meet a whole lot more often. So anyway, those are my concerns. I plan to vote for this, but I do think if there's any more input, I'd like to hear it, because I think this is really important. At this point, I'm still confused as to, first of all, it's a capital plan, whether it is or isn't improvements. And our impact fees can only be used to expand roadways and intersections, or to certain roadways and intersections. So the impact fee eligibility piece seems like it's a piece of it, but it's not clear whether this is really going to do an analysis of all of our capital plan or all of our arterials and the needs on those arterials, or if it's really just going to focus on what's impact fee eligible. In which case, let's just be honest, it's an impact fee eligible plan. It's about arterial expansion. It's not really about overall capital improvements, which is what the 5-year integrated plan is. So either we go with, let's be very specific about what it's for, or we use this tool, there's impact fee eligible programs in it, to do an analysis of all of our capital needs, or all of our capital needs on the arterial roadway system. So I'm not too sure which direction we're going to go, and I don't think we can just split the baby on this. We have to make a decision. Hopefully the consultants will help us make that.
Madam President, Commissioner, thank you. Great points, and certainly we're taking notes on your questions and concerns. And we have the consultant on the call taking notes regarding the expectation the Commission have for this next update. So we will, as you mentioned, we'll come back in front of the Commission with the advisory committees and take advantage of those resources as we move forward through this process.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that very much. I appreciate the initiative Justin's doing with consultants to say, we want to use your expertise. We don't want to you to just give us what we think we want to hear. We want you to actually challenge us and bring new things to us. Because some consultants they're like, well, we're getting paid, figure out what they want us to tell them and we'll tell them that. So we have a process that's actually gonna tap deeply into and this consultant in particular has had some very innovative things throughout the country to hear their analysis on it.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thanks, Edmondson. Any other questions on this topic? I believe, Mr. Costa, did you still want to testify on it? Okay. Please state your name and address for the record.
Thanks, Commissioners. Don Kostelek, 1623 South Division Avenue, Boise. I want to reiterate Commissioner Hansen's effort and thank the staff for choosing Kittleson and Associates to perform this work. Their national research work has focused on modernizing the historical and very flawed focus on building roads to meet peak hour traffic forecasts, which has been the basis of the ACHD impact fee program for 30 years. So I'm glad this scope starts with examining more modern efforts. I did see, however, that like Task C with intersection analysis reverts back to the flawed way of thinking. And a way to think about it is, and I think the Amity Eagle Roundabout's an example of this, ACHD's methodology first identifies motorist level of service, and it lays out the entire road and intersection for that, and then it accessorizes by slapping the pedestrian and bicyclist stuff on the side. That's not a livable street, that's not a safe street, and things like the slip lane at Amity and Eagle that FHWA says is unsafe for pedestrians and bicyclists was a CIP-driven level of service piece. I have an article here that I'll give you a copy of from Kittleson, and they wrote on their website for an upcoming research publication, the outcome of measuring demand using the peak hour is, in many cases, an over-design of transportation facilities, especially if used in conjunction with future year traffic forecasts. That's your CIP in a nutshell. Not me talking, Kittleson. Design decisions based off peak hour estimates tend to overcompensate in favor of cars, creating barriers and unsafe situations for people walking and biking, as well as significant costs for agencies. Designing roads for peak hour car traffic is like designing your dining room for Thanksgiving dinner. Most evenings, you'll be eating dinner surrounded by empty chairs. Simply put, use of the peak hour means ACHD is overcharging developers on impact fees. Use of the peak hour means ACHD is saddling itself with a perpetual maintenance burden of an overbuilt system. Use of the peak hour means ACHD is transferring more private land to the government in perpetuity to satisfy nothing but a 1 hour traffic forecast. So from a fiscal conservative standpoint and a property rights standpoint, it has an impact. As we know, and Commissioner Pickering pointed out a few weeks ago, the ACHD high injury crash network that Boise PD presented to you is almost identical to the roads ACHD has widened in the past using impact fees based on the peak hour model. Therefore, use of the peak hour means more people have died and will continue to do so on ACHD roads if peak hour is followed. Having unused capacity in off-peak hours, as Kittleson says, is deadly and induces speeding. And this graphic that I will hand you shows that from Kittleson. The only other change I'd recommend in the scope of work is that the visioning sessions include the pedestrian, bicycle, ADA, and your commercial developers advisory group. The level of traffic stress and ADA transition plan are specifically mentioned in the scope. And as Commissioner Hansen said, the CICAC isn't really equipped on bike ped issues or development issues. So I think broadening that to include all of those groups and get the right trade-offs would be beneficial. But again, thanks for choosing a good organization to do it and look forward to the modernization of that. Thank you.
Madam President,
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Commissioner Commissioner McKinney, excuse me.
I just have one question. If we don't design for peak hour, what do we design for?
24 hours. Read what Kittleson wrote here in that, Commissioner.
So a 24-hour average?
Sure. Yeah, the methodologies are in here.
How do you deal with then the fact that, a 5-minute delay in any given lane of traffic results in 1 hour of a traffic jam? It's a 20-to-1 ratio, basically, speaking. So if we're designing our intersections not to function even at level of service D during the peak hour, it's gonna be much worse, we're gonna get delays 20 times as long. How do we deal with that?
You're assuming that the demand is fixed. ACHD's Livable Streets Design Guide says a traffic model assumes nobody will ever decide to not make a trip because of congestion. Nobody will decide to take a trip at another time of day. Your traffic model doesn't consider gas prices. Your traffic models consider none of the human factors in that. It just assumes if 10,000 people want to use it in an hour today, that will exponentially increase it, and traffic congestion won't impact people's travels. That's in an ACHD document that I can send you.
Okay, but is it your belief then that wide, way more than 99% of all the demand on ACHD roadways, everything is motor vehicles, right? By far.
Sure. I mean, if our roads are as disconnected as our sidewalk bikeway system, nobody would be driving.
Sure, but that's all a function of development patterns, is it not?
No, not necessarily.
Facts on the ground, everything is spread out for the most part. Throughout most of the county, things are quite spread out.
Okay.
We design our intersections to primarily to accommodate bicyclists and pedestrians when they're just a very, very, very small percentage of who's using the system. How then do we make a system that works for everyone?
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is when you design for peak hour and ignore the rest, roads are also deadlier for motorists because they're faster in the off-peak hours because it's built for excess demand that's only based on 1 hour a day. As a fiscal conservative, I don't see how that is sanity from an expenditure standpoint.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Don.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? All right, with that, is there a motion?
Madam President, with excellent comments and by all the commissioners and guests, I would move for the approval of the professional services agreement for the 2025 Capital Improvements Plan update.
I'll second that.
So moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, moving on to our third item, ordinance 250, the access management policy. It was deferred from June 7th, so if that rings a bell and is helpful, please take a note of that date. This is a request for adoption and it is a public hearing, so I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing. Welcome, Mr. Ryan Head.
Thank you, Madam President, Commission. Get the right presentation here. We'll get going. All right. So, for the record, Ryan Head, Deputy Director of Technical Services, here today to discuss Ordinance 250 and continue your public hearing on the access management policy update. Just want to review from the process perspective. Since that public hearing, we've done extensive public outreach to a number of different stakeholders. I'll review those in a moment and visited with you on the comments that were received last week. Here's a summary of the meetings that were held and the outreach that was done, including distributing items that were requested at that last public hearing, as well as throughout this time to all participants in these groups. These are the comments that were reviewed with you. And just to provide a quick summary here that there are positives that have and steps that have been made, but there's also some lingering. I wanted to review with you quickly today. We did receive a letter from the city of this last week. They did express their support and appreciation for the collaboration. They did also express interest, similar to the city of Meridian, exploring ACHD participation in cross-access. And then there were a couple specific text recommendations. The first bullet here We just wanted to highlight some changes there to make sure that it's clear, that not signals, but cues that we're talking about, or that all users get the right cues. And then there was some questions with regards to non-traversable medians, and so we are recommending the addition of language, and that would be worked out as we coordinate with our land use jurisdictions, look at the land use patterns, and identify when that is appropriate. So with that, staff is 250 with those text changes as highlighted again here. Additionally, based on conversation last week with the commission, we would recommend staff direct our commission direct staff to develop, publish PROAG design guidance in the next 60 days and bring that and also publish that and bring that back for review. So with that, I turn it over to you to continue your public hearing, as well as I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Brian. I just want to say thank you for incorporating the city's edits. I think the easy edits to make. So I appreciate the cities in doing that, and then also you and your lead to incorporate those edits. So, Commissioner McKinney, did you have any questions? We
Yes.
wanted to incorporate what you had mentioned last week.
Yes, Madam President. Ryan, I just have a question. Last week, there was a question brought up that I believe a developer had asked about the accessible parking spaces in the public right-of-way. And I'm wondering if, you know, what we've done with regard to that, what section does that deal with specifically? I'm wondering if we can discuss that just a little bit to make sure I understand what the concern is and what, if anything, we have done about it.
Madam President, Commissioner Commissioner McKinney, the conversation related to accessible parking spaces and on-street accessible parking spaces is really actually controlled by the cities. ACHD does not mark parking stalls or parking spaces. That is done by the cities under their jurisdiction. And so in those circumstances in which the city does require that, there is a requirement for a certain number of accessible parking spaces along a block base or along the perimeter of a road or of a block. And so there are conditions under PROAG that know how that should look and describe that, but really that's not necessarily a ACHD requirement. It would requirement that would be imposed when they require on-street parking spaces to be
So
marked.
does that concern implicate any portion of this policy? And if so, what portion of it, or is it just simply outside of it?
It would be outside of it. It is, you know, and if you take the adoption of PROAG, you could try and get there, but ultimately a city's PROAG, not ACH.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions for staff before we turn it over to the public? Okay, thank you, Ryan. All right, so I've got the list of folks that are signed up to testify. So first on my list is Mr. John Wardle. Welcome, John. Please state your name and address for the record. Have 3 minutes.
Perfect. Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Wardle with Brighton, 2929 West Navigator Drive, Meridian, Idaho, 83642. I just had a question for Ryan. What was his end recommendation on the PROAG? He said taking a little bit more time. I didn't quite understand what that request was. If only the access policy piece of it that was kind of shown was being addressed, or if we're talking about everything tonight. So.
Yeah, Madam President, Commission, the recommendation, and this has been something that was requested at the prior public hearing as well, is that ACHD develop guidelines for how PROAG will be implemented, similar to what we've recently come out with regarding T intersections. And so with the adoption, which does include the adoption of PROAG into our policy, that we would take this secondary action to make sure that we have guidance that's available for everyone to understand exactly what that means.
Okay. Commissioners, again, John Wardle with Brighton. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you for letting us come back again. When we were here in June, we requested that we have a little bit more time to evaluate this. Congratulations or kudos to staff. They did a lot of outreach. They made attempts with emails and meetings and things like that. So the conversation was more robust. So that was very helpful. One of the things that we continue to be concerned about is just the implementation, interpretation, and flexibility of the ProWAG guidelines, and how those will be viewed. I will note that staff was able to come up with some solutions on T intersections and demonstrated flexibility. I think that's what we're really hoping for, that we can find flexibility when circumstances dictate those. Without that flexibility being stated or known within the document, it will come down to a black and white interpretation at some point. This commission will change, staff will change, ProWAG will be the adopted standard. Those will also change, and that's what everybody will go back to. So we would like some clarity, and I'm assuming that's what Ryan was referencing, of coming back and how it will be implemented. That will be very helpful, and we'll want to see how that's going to roll out. We still are concerned about just adopting anything by reference, because those documents haven't been adopted, or they're not federally mandated. They could still change, and there may be something that this jurisdiction determines that's not feasible or appropriate for what you have here. I do want to also state that we are supportive of the actions that ACHD has taken on accessibility. You have been at the forefront. It's been noted through previous actions, going all the way back to where the first MIG report came back in 2019, of your proactive nature on this. And that's good. I think ACHD has led in front. We just continue to be concerned about adoption of something that is not federally mandated at this point in time. So that word, it might come up, how do we determine what the flexibility will be in interpretation? And hopefully that can be done at staff level, not have to come back here to commission to figure out if an application is accurate or correct for a certain project or not. I know that you have received both my letters. I won't get into the details there, but I do appreciate the time and wanted to note on the record, thank you for taking a pause, letting us review, and continue to be part of the process. So stand for any questions you might have for me.
No, thank you, Mr. Wardle, and we appreciate all the effort and time that you've put in to participate in making this policy better.
Madam President.
Commissioner McKinney.
Mr. Wardle, last week when we were discussing, or the last time we were discussing this policy or one similar to it, the suggestion was made that in certain aspects of these policies where there is flexibility, that essentially the district create, for lack of a better word, a database of precedent. That is to say, where situations come up, here's a decision that was made, and we catalog that so that in the future, when similar situations come up, that's something that at least a reference to, because it'll be publicly available. Kind of like the way, lawyers look at legal precedents. Here's a case where this was done, you ought to do the same thing here. Would you be in favor of something like that and having something like that in the policy? That is to say, where aspects of the policy allow for flexibility, the district will at least keep a record of what's done in individual cases to be referred to in future cases. Would you be in favor of something like that?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, yes, that would be very helpful. That as projects come forward and there seems to be a pattern of where things do need adjustments, yes, keeping track of those would be very helpful. I would say that your staff has been very good at looking for solutions. I think where we got concerned probably 3 or 4 months ago, where we were sitting in a meeting that was talking about T intersections, there was a staff member that was very rigid in their approach of this is what ProWAG says and there's no flexibility. So that's why this has escalated to this point. As long as there's flexibility and your staff can use we we can work with them. But if it comes down to a black and white and someone's interpretation and the flexibility that we've been talking about goes away, then we have concerns. So back to your original point, yes, it'd be great to have a database or a note of, hey, this is the way we've addressed this in this application, and continue to do so that we can go back to and refer to those if they come up in the future.
Thank you.
Madam President and John, I appreciate that comment. Every once in a while, we do get some engineers who think really black and white. What I've been impressed with is that the leadership of the different departments has been pushing for much more flexible interpretation, even of existing policies. But there's always that option too, to bring it up to the next level, the next supervisor, and then ultimately up to the commission. Now, in fact, it's that very desire from some developers who did that with a development who wanted, we said, this is how we're going to interpret access. You have to take it off of the lesser typology. The developer said, this doesn't make sense here. We brought it up. We says, well, we need to have flexibility. We need to have flexibility in our policies, which is what this is doing. And B, in the meantime, we're going to move forward and allow for the access off of that piece of property, for that piece of property that's not on the lesser typologies road. And so there's that avenue in the rare circumstance. And my reading of this is there's probably going to be no cases where the staff will recognize, yes, we need to have a flexible interpretation of this. Otherwise, it will go to the commission and will be overruled, as we did on that piece of property. I can't remember where it was. It's over by the county line.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Wardle.
Thank
Did you have a
you.
response?
If I just one comment back there, Madam President, Commissioner Hanson. I think the wonderful part about ACHD right now is you have a highly qualified staff. And I think there were years past, where your agenda was overloaded with development applications. But I would say for the most part, you maybe see, they'd have to say, but my guess is there's probably less than 10% of development applications rise up to you. And so staff is able to deal with most of these issues. What we're most concerned about is that if it is a black and white, our hands are tied, you need to go to the commission. The last thing we want to do is come to you to talk about a ped ramp. And that's an oversimplification, but we are talking about, the making sure that how ACHD has presently designed things, and how a group, not part here, but there is a standard or recommendations. If it gets to you have to do it this way, we don't want to come to the commission to do that. We would like staff to have clear direction on flexibility.
Madam President and John, that's good. It's a really good point, but I would say that's what we're here for. And with respect to the parking requirements, that's something that costs you guys a lot of money. And sometimes, in looking back at some of the things that we've required, I think, why did we require that level of parking? How come the developer who knew this is going to cost him didn't bring it up and say, that doesn't make sense? So actually, I'd say in those rare cases where it's like, this doesn't make sense, that's what we're here for. And it's the way in which we can determine whether there is flexibility truly in the policy, or with respect to like parking minimums, we need to change those policies, which perhaps we should.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. All right, well, we're going to jump the line a little bit because I think the city has a conflict. So, Bree Brush.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for accommodating me. I have to rush back to City Hall. Thank you for taking in our suggestions and incorporating some of the edits I included in my email last week. I'll just reiterate a couple of points that I had in here for the record. First, we appreciate the emphasis on partnership with land use agencies throughout the draft. I think it shows strongly, and it shows our community and those who help build it, that this agency and our agency prioritizes the relationship between land use and transportation. Addressing the PROAG standards as part of your access management policy with flexibility where needed provides a great opportunity for you all to get ahead of the curve. avoid expensive retrofits, and ensure our public rights-of-way are accessible for all. And I also wanted to give a huge shout out for the section that Commissioner Hanson just referenced for access points. I think it's in 7205 4.1, allowing the flexibility to take access off of a higher classified roadway when it is warranted. So again, just appreciation. And then I wanted to comment on some of the on-street parking requirements for accessibility. I just sent a message to our team to see what our requirements are, but as it's enforced in City of Boise, if you have a handicap placard, you can park in any metered stall and any time limited parking area for free. It's not enforced if you have a disability placard. So it might not be as relevant for us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bree. Any questions? All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Dave Jorgensen. Welcome.
Thank you. For the record, Dave Jorgensen, and my address 14254 West Battenberg Drive, Boise. First of all, thanks to the commission for taking pause. As Mr. Wardle has stated previously, I just need a little more time to digest. And secondly, working with staff, appreciate the suggested changes to specifically I know a lot of the developers who work with the single-family detached homes, the T-type intersection of the conflicts that were raised there. Appreciate staff's acknowledgement of, okay, yep, that is a conflict. We need to find a solution. And flexibility is acknowledged. We appreciate that. I recognize and support the letter that was submitted by John Wardle from Brighton. There are other conflicts to work through, and I don't know how to resolve those. I'm just recognizing I think there might be a few that are hanging out there, which I struggle, I guess, kind of the end of the day. I really appreciate the good that's in this ordinance change, as there's quite a bit. There's things about the access management, as we've discussed here. Things about performance, livable street standards and designs are good things. Though I may not know all of it, I'll digest and learn. I think there's some good things there. But when I see in the document that says shall adopt specifically ProWag, and yet I don't know where in the rest of the document it says that we can do it instead of shall be may, and with the word shall versus may comes that rigidity that fear still is hanging out there. And so with that, I don't know if there's ways to say ACHD's adopted the ProWag standards or guidelines as of this date, because I know that they can adjust and flex and change, and if they change in a few months from now, then we might end up having new consequences here to ACHD that we don't even know what there are today, but they would be in place a few months from now. So with all that, that's the one concern that I know is still hanging out there is shall versus may in the adoption of the ProWag standards. There may be a few other things, but that's kind of the highest level. With that, I appreciate, again, taking pause, making the adjustments that were made, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jorgensen. Any questions?
Madam President?
Commissioner McKinney?
Dave, do you have any specific sections of the proposed,
Hold on, Commissioner. So we're working through the timer. I know, we're working through it right now. Yeah.
It's okay.
So, I'm keeping tabs of the time, but yeah, keep
That's
going,
fine.
Commissioner McKinney.
are there any specific portions of the policy that's proposed that you'd like to point out to us to consider where you have concerns?
Madam President and Commissioner McKinney, I don't have the text in front of me to say, okay, these 2 or 3 or 5. Again, it's very specific. The word shall adopt ProWag versus may adopt ProWag. If your staff could find that, or maybe I could huddle back in the back and pull it up and come back later. I could try to help you with that.
We can address it at the
I
end.
think your staff's on top of that level of detail
Thank
too. But that would be the specifics. It's not the whole document because ProWag's not referenced in the whole document. It's only in certain.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
You're welcome.
Jorgensen.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Jeff Hess.
Madam President, Commissioners, my name is Jeff Hess Hawkins, Homes and Communities, addresses 855 Broad Street, Suite 300 in Boise, 83702. As stated earlier, thank you all for allowing the development group input into this process. Unfortunately, the timeline for this hearing has left a lot of things that were unresolved. As John, Mr. Wardle's email indicated, there were a number of specifics there, possibly Commissioner McKinney was alluding to, that have been left unresolved. But however, the key thing is, as Dave, Mr. Jorgensen has indicated, the term shall is one of those in the legal community that doesn't give you any leeway. And so when you adopt a shall for a whole document without some written ability for staff to change, they're left with, this is what the document reads and we can't deviate. That's why I think our concern is you're going to see a lot more of those things that the the staff are going to look at and say, hey, this makes sense. But we have no decision-making authority, so we're going to bring it up here. Anyway, Commissioner McKinney, you actually stole my thunder. I was, in my comments as an attorney, it's always important to have a body of work that you can rely on in precedents. ProRag right now does not have that body nationally as the ADA would have. We can look at a lot of other jurisdictions around in the ADA that says, here's how we solve that unique problem that you bring up here. So that's the one thing that I think's probably a missing, although the idea of having our own sort of modified database that we could look back as this how we solved it, we just don't have that background in ProRag to rely on. While with the development community are supportive of the way of doing things, how, you know, we look forward to new and unique ways to look at it. This is one that limits us and we don't know how it's going to go, and adopting the shall is the problem. Waiting for the guidelines is sort of like buying a pig in a poke. We don't know what those guidelines are going to be, and that's sort of where I think you all are looking for. Maybe that's where the flexibility is, but I don't know how you develop guidelines when you shall as a directive to the staff. I just hit up the thing about the city of Boise. This is the first time I've hit it, and I had a conversation with Christy some time ago about cross. If I could just finish.
Really brief, Mr. Hess.
Thank you. Cross access is a really unique contractual arrangement on the real estate between a future owner and a present owner, how we get access. Typically, these are on a corner location or up from a corner. We just ran into one. We had a meeting just not too long ago. It's a very, very difficult and almost putting ACHD in the middle of two contracting individuals over cross access. I have a problem with that as a direction, and specifically without that never coming up before us.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. Okay. Any questions for Mr. Hess? Thank you.
Thank you.
The next one is, I can't read the last name, but Laura, is there a Laura? Oh. State your name and address for the record, please.
It's Lauren Bailey, Commissioner.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for.
It's missing the L and the E.
Oh, sorry. I was writing fast trying to get in here.
Thank you.
Again, my name is Lauren Bailey. My business address is 4824 West Fairview Avenue, Boise, Idaho. And I'm here today representing Conger Management Group, Devco, and BlackRock Homes. I don't want to go into all the details that the people before me covered, Dave and John and everyone. But again, it comes down to this may and shall issue. And again, telling us that we're going to be flexible is great, and we're thankful for that. But unless it's in writing, it doesn't really mean much. And not only does it not mean much to staff, but down the road, as Mr. Hess indicated, if something does go to court, if it says shall, that judge is going to read it shall. It's a must. There is no flexibility. There should be no flexibility. That's the way it needs to be. We believe there needs to be flexibility in the wording so that staff and commission can have flexibility in their decision making in the future. So that's one of the big issues for us. There was a question about specifics, and I think Mr. Wardle brought up several great ones in his letter, but the one about snow removal I think was huge to me. If we adopt this whole hog, does that mean that now ACHD is going to be shoveling everyone's sidewalk countywide. And if that's the case, I think this is a much bigger issue that needs, I mean, that's a huge taxpayer implication. So those are the items that I think there's more of in this document. I appreciate giving us the time to go through this, but the more we dig in, honestly, I've spent quite a bit of time with this as well. Every item I dig into, there's just more items. There's more questions, more concerns. And that's why I think also, as put forth as an option, I think this guidelines of how we're going to interpret it, I think that should be part of this discussion, not adopt it and then come up with guidelines. We should come up with guidelines that we can all work with and agree to and comment on before we adopt the binding document. So with that, I'll just stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Don Kostelek.
Thank you, Commissioners. Don Kostelek, 1623 South Division, Boise. ACHD has made PROAG a standard for almost 20 years. I'm not sure if the Commission has been known that. In 2004, when ACHD and I was project manager, did our first ADA transition plan, and I'm pretty sure the memos are in the bowels of ACHD's files, Mr. Price, working with the Department of Justice and the Federal Highway Administration, found a determination that if we moved as ACHD to make PROAG our standard, DOJ and FHWA would not process a legal case if PROAG changed. That's because we had documented why we did something and they recognized they were in draft form. Your design standards right now incorporate PROAG. For example, ADA standards do not require truncated domes. PROAG would. The reason ACHD has been doing PROAG on truncated domes for 20 years now is because the moment PROAG becomes the standard, you have to incorporate into your transition plan and a future budget retrofitting all of the public infrastructure that doesn't meet that. So I think Mr. Head or Mr. Price could speak to the fiscal impacts of going to may instead of shall, that if these developers did not build things to PROAG, the fiscal burden would fall on the taxpayers in the future to do that. PROAG is needed because the ADA standards were never intended for public rights of way. That's not Don Kostelek talking. That's the U.S. Department of Justice, the Federal Highway Administration, and United States Access Board. Here's what FHWA says. The guidelines, PROAG, are the currently recommended best practice and can be considered the state of the practice that could be followed for areas not fully addressed by the present standards. We don't say you may provide accessible access to a voting booth. We don't say you may do racially integrated bathrooms. ADA comes from civil rights law, and that's where this stuff stems. So by not doing this, you're denying equal access to people with disabilities once PROAG becomes the final rule. It has already gone through Office of Management and Budget. I've been speaking with the Senator's office on this out of Pennsylvania. So finally, to summarize, I think I've made the main points. What I would suggest is to do this. Instead of changing the word may, use the word shall and add except for any documented exception. And the reason I recommend that, in working on ADA transition plans across the country, we develop engineering design exception forms for public agencies to use. And it recognizes you can't make everything 100% ADA compliant, but if documented reason, and if I may just finish up for a second, you are covered legally for it. And I fully understand a developer and somebody else to come in and even ACHD's own projects to go, we can't 100% meet the standard. The way you keep from getting sued is to document the design exception. My only fear in that is the design exception becomes a way to wiggle out of trying to address it to the maximum extent feasible. So just to reiterate, instead of changing shall to may, say shall, except for a documented design exception, and have the staff develop a design exception form for use. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kostelek. Council President Jimmy Halliburton.
Good afternoon, Jimmy Halliburton, 3025 North Crane Creek Road. I want to start by thanking the Commission for taking this agenda item so seriously and taking it seriously over a long period of time, doing outreach to all the different stakeholders. And certainly I want to say thank you to staff to take that stakeholder outreach and turn it into a document that's better than it started out. And I certainly want to say thank you to all the folks who've testified as well. Everyone's trying to get something better here. And that's always our goal, is to have something better than what existed before. We're always moving towards better. I came here to testify today to, one, show our support for the city's letter. And I appreciate Bree Brush coming down. She's going to be that expertise on the technical aspects of this. But I also want to share my perspective as someone sitting on city council for the last several years. The most challenging and most controversial discussions that we have at city council is when there's infrastructure in place. Could be street infrastructure, could be physical housing infrastructure that does not meet the standards of what we need today. And so we have a housing complex come in front of us that has an issue with a street crossing down the street that's out of date, that's not compliant, with a railroad crossing, with whatever it might be. And so we go through these huge debates. Things get appealed, there's variances, there's all sorts of different things. And then sometimes there's additional conditions that are put on the developers to address some of these specific issues. What we have with the PROAG standards is a standard. It is the best in class standard that exists right now, and it's widely accepted across the entire country. It's not federally accepted or approved yet, but it's still considered the best standard, and it's moving towards something better. As it's adopted federally, we know that there might be changes, but those changes, again, will be moving it towards better, and that will improve what we see at ACH. I think we have an opportunity right now to actually, there's concerns about elevated cost, to keep the cost down by doing it right now, instead of having to go back and change anything in the future, which is going to be more cost for the taxpayer, more cost for city staff, as we go through these different appeal hearings, and more cost for the developers as it slows things down. Commissioner Goldthorpe, one of the things that I've always appreciated about you is sort of this dig once, build once philosophy. And here's that opportunity, I think, to do that right now, is to take a standard that we know is going to be accepted, that's best in class, that serves all of our community members, prioritizes people with the most barriers, and lets us do it right the first time, instead of going back and doing it again a second time, a third time, so that we're trying to get those standards right in the first place. We know that this is the direction that we're heading, and this is a great opportunity for both the city and the ACHD to get ahead of the curve, but also do what's right now, adopt the best in class standards for what our community members need right now, and not just predict the future, but also do it for the current needs that exist for all of our community members today. As far as technical questions go, those are going to be best for, I think, your staff or city staff. But if you have any questions, I'm really happy to answer.
Thank you, Council President Jimmy Halliburton. Any questions for him? No, thank you so much for being here. All right, so that's it for in-person testimony that folks have signed up for. Switching to online, do we have anybody, Karen?
Yes, we have one person.
Okay. Who is it? Jeremy. Oh, Jeremy, you're up. We're excited to have you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, super. Jeremy Maxon, 5861 East Playwright Street, Boise 3716, which is a beautiful, universally designed Brighton home in River Heights in Southeast Boise. Just got to put that shameless plug for Brighton in. I want to, I guess, kind of amplify what Mr. Kostelik said. My understanding is that, first of all, I support inclusion of the PROAG. Obviously, I'm a person who uses a wheelchair. I work directly with folks with physical disabilities, folks who are blind, low vision, all day long, every day. And the standards that are set in PROAG make a huge difference for people's ability to safely and efficiently move around the community. So these are real recommendations, real rules or guidelines that have a real, tangible, positive impact on people's lives. I understand that they come with a cost. I appreciate the issues being raised by the development and building community. I don't think that as a taxpayer, I don't think that we should be building facilities beyond what we need that cost more money, that create a larger financial burden on folks trying to buy homes and all of that sort of stuff. But at the same time, I think, as was said, PROAG has been used for 20 years by ACHD with great success, and it was very proactive and has positioned the county our highway district to be in a solid position once those rules pass, and they will pass. My understanding of ProWag, as well as the ADA, is that there is room for exceptions, and those exceptions happen all the time. I go and do technical assessments around the ADA, from polling locations to businesses to pathways to you name it. We're looking at that stuff all the time. And the building community, I'm sure, can attest to this, but the second the concrete dries, there's a really, really good chance that you're already out of compliance with the ADA in terms of slopes and grades and cracks and all sorts of stuff that naturally happens. I think the recommendation to say we shall comply with ProWag, I support that. The ADA is a civil rights law. ProWag is a more defined description of the rules to make the public right-of-way accessible. But I also think it's smart to put in there, with the exception of a defensible reason why the guidelines can't be adhered to. That happens all the time. Those provisions are in the law. And I believe ACHD has, for 20 years, been having those conversations with builders to avoid building infrastructure that might be too costly or expensive. My primary concern, and then I'll wrap it up, is that I don't want us to get into a slippery slope where the builders who aren't concerned about access are nickel and diming every feature to try and get the lowest cost on their obligations to building public right-of-way on projects. And that, lean on your advisory committees. If you've got a question about whether or not a feature or design is important or is going to work, or if you can change it to fit a project, lean on your advisory committees to give you some real world input on how that change or feature is going to impact people. But other than that, I think we've got all the tools to do this job. I think we've been doing it. I understand the concern about the language that has not been codified yet by Congress. Shame on them. But I do think all of us continuing to work in concert and communicate and draw on our experiences, I don't think this is going to be that big of a deal at the end of the day. And I'll just leave it at that. And we'll support whatever you all finally decide to do. So thanks.
Thank you, Jeremy. Any questions for Commissioner Goldthorpe?
Oh, not for Jeremy.
Oh, not for Jeremy. Okay. Thank you so much for testifying. And is there anyone else online that would like to testify at this time? Nina?
Yes,
Oh, you're welcome to testify. Yes, Nina, go for it. Just state your name and address.
thank you so much. Good afternoon, Madam President, Commissioners. Thank you so much for your time and effort you're putting into this policy. My name is Nina Pina, and I live at 1516 North 21st Street, Boise. I'm testifying today as Boise Bicycle Project's Advocacy Director, but also as an avid commuter cyclist. Access management and the inclusion of ProWag standards in this policy is so important for all residents. When we build a road network that is safe for children, the elderly, or residents with disabilities to navigate our streets, we have just created a safe system for all. The Boise Bicycle Project serves a big portion of the community that uses bikes as their primary mode of transport. And this policy can provide so many residents, and especially kids, with infrastructure that keeps them safe and allows them to bike around town without being scared. BBP has also started providing bikes for individuals with disabilities, and we need to make sure that these individuals, A, are able to bike on our roads, and B, feel safe to do so. I would like to reiterate what Council President Halliburton said. We need to do it right the first time. And lastly, I'd just like to thank the Commission for updating this policy and including measures to make our streets safe for all residents. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nina. Any questions for Nina? I know we have a few other people online, so I just want to give one more shout out. If you want to testify, now's the time.
Hi, this is Dana Gover with the Northwest ADA Center, Idaho. I'd like to just say a couple of words about the ProWag.
Dana, can you state your address for the record, please?
Yes, my address is 1106 South Vermont, Boise, Idaho, 83706.
Thank you.
We've talked about ProWag. The guidelines have been in the ADA for many, many years, and I know there's some concerns about it changing if you adopt this. So, I worked on state laws years ago when we adopted the ADA for Title II for state law for parking. And what we did as we included some lines in the state law that said, as amended. So when you put in legislation, you can always, or policy, you can always put in that if things change, then you will, go with the changes. And I don't have the words right now, but that's in state law with accessible parking on streets. The ADA provides some basic design guidelines for buildings. And as Don stated, and also Jeremy, with the public rights of way, we need some consistency and something that's basic that people can follow. I can't tell you how many times I get questions about what to follow because it does get confusing. But under PROAG, just like the ADA, there are, you can make significant differences based on what, like Don said, and Jeremy, about if this does not fit, then let's look at what will fit. You've got to remember that the ADA and the PROAG are basic guidelines. The ADA is with the 2010 ADA design guidelines, those are enforceable civil rights. Now, once the PROAG goes in, that will also be enforceable. But what we saw when the 2010 ADA amendments were done, then you had to go back and retrofit. So I can tell you, we went to new neighborhoods. We went to, as part of the Idaho Access Project, and reviewed those. And you've got new neighborhoods that have got design flaws with in the public rights of way. And we all shake our head, not understanding why. And I think the reason is why, because people are not following a basic design. And there's a lot of options in PROAG. So I just wanted to say, as a person, I'm also use a wheelchair, and I also work with people who are blind and low vision and other disabilities. And some of my very good friends have disabilities besides myself. And I can't tell you how horrible it is to go down a sidewalk and not be able to cross an intersection. Or if you're blind or low vision and bumping into signs, all that information is in PROAG. And, there's flexibilities in that. So, and I understand from the development community that this could be costly, but let's all work together because we are all on committees, and we have developers come up to us, and we all try to work together to compromise. So that's all that I would like to say today, but thank you for letting me talk.
I wasn't on. Sorry, guys, I didn't have my mic on. Eric, did you want to testify? State your name and address for the record, please.
Yeah, my name is Eric Kingston. I live at 1010 East Jefferson, and I'm also on the board of the Idaho Access Project. And I really want to kind of endorse and support what some of the folks have said prior to this, particularly Don Kostelek, Jeremy Maxon, Dana Gover, and Nina, and Council President Halliburton. I think that, in broad terms, one thing I know that is probably embraced by Commissioner Goldthorpe is planning ahead is almost always more satisfying, cost-effective, and kind of embraced than planning behind. And what we're talking about, if we allow that wiggle room, is what Dana just referred to, is having people, basically pour concrete, and we result with a non-compliant, hazardous, or deadly, compliance issue. And it's gonna cost a lot more to repair something like that, after the fact than it is to just plan ahead, get it done right the first time. Again, dig once, build once, pour once. I think that just makes a lot of sense. And I just like to notice that there's not a lot of people representing taxpayers in today's conversation. And it makes me wonder if taxpayers are involved when, developers go to ACHD and request more flexibility. My concern as a taxpayer is, sometimes that too much flexibility, that to me says that I'm going to be on the hook for some of the costs that result from that down the road. So I just want to make sure that we're basically following the guidelines that have been in effect as part of the civil rights of this country for the last 20 years. We all know what we should do, and I think it's a lot more cost effective to do the right thing up front. So I really appreciate all the work you're doing, and I think, like some of the other folks said, I think Don's suggestion for creating some exception language is really the right way to go about this and make it clear to everybody. So anyway, thanks for your work, and appreciate the time to talk.
Thank you, Eric. Any questions? All right, last call. Anybody else online? All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. Ryan, did you want to address the question about any questions that came up at all? No? Okay, great. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, and I think before I start, I'm going to ask Steve Price to duct tape himself to the microphone.
I don't know if you'll need to duct tape him, though.
I appreciate the comments about me being a once and done guy, because that's kind of what I want to do here with my questions and possibly with the conclusion of this discussion today. Steve, for many weeks now, I've been suggesting, at least to myself and out loud a couple of times, that we might be able to cover ourselves legally, continue on the path for PROAG adoption and adherence to, and prevent some of the abuses that, that's my word, not anybody else's, that we were shown a couple of weeks ago with improperly placed or built ADA facilities. And if, number one, if we could use our inspectors a little bit more proactively to prevent those kinds of things from happening, if somehow we could use our inspectors to maybe more thoroughly enforce what the decisions from development services are, which, as we've already mentioned many times today, have been in accordance with PROAG and have been for a very long time, but that we also address the issue of the word may and the flexibility that we need to have in the adoption of this ordinance, or the accommodation of what this ordinance wishes, the intent. If we can use the word may along with some trigger language that causes this ordinance to fully adopt PROAG when the government finally gets around to it, can we do that?
Madam President.
I know that was a mouthful.
Madam President, Commissioners, for the record, Steve Price, General Counsel. Well, if you recall, when we had the MIG report brought to the Commission, it was approved, and part of the recommendation for MIG was to adopt PROAG in total. And the second phase of that project is to incorporate PROAG into our policy. And that's where we're at. The policy arguments on whether to include PROAG and to include shall or may, that is for the Commission, and we'll take our direction. If you are interested in pursuing more flexibility, especially into this, I would like to hold an executive session with the Commission and review that flexibility. I have some ideas, but change in may and shall, and with the particulars of PROAG, I would want to make sure that I get the language right on any exceptions. But previously, I'm just going to reiterate, this Commission has adopted PROAG in total in the past. And that is the direction that staff has received. And that's why you have words like shall versus may. I don't think staff, and now in terms of compliance, the one way to think of it is you have OSHA standards, and ACHD is not governed by OSHA. Now, let's say you have an incident where you have an OSHA standard and that particular agency is required to adhere to OSHA. If that contractor or that agency fails to comply, that is strict liability. That is a mandatory standard. But so does that mean that ACHD on an OSHA violation, even though we're not covered, means we have no liability? Absolutely not.
Right, because we still have to
What it
replace
means
things.
is that OSHA standard becomes the standard of care in the industry, and you can still be held liable under a negligence standard. And so when you get into guidelines or shalls, those have broad implications on the liability of the organization. But at the end of the day, the PROWAG are guidelines that really are the best practices and would be interpreted, I believe, as the standard of care in the industry. But in any event, I think this is legal in terms of the technical legal requirements. I think it's a situation where I'd like to have a full briefing with the commission to review all of the liability and the language that we would want to come up. I have not come up with that language based upon the commission's past policy decision. But if that's the commission's decision to add flexibility, I'm most certainly happy to tackle that.
About the trigger language.
The trigger language?
Right.
Yes. Creating an exception.
Okay.
More flexibility.
Madam President?
Commissioner McKinney.
Steve, on this same concept, I guess it seems to me that the language that we're kind of talking about is in section 7203.1, where it says alterations and elements added to existing facilities shall comply with the current version of the U.S. Access Board Public Rights of Way Accessibility Guidelines, which is PROWAG. Now, that seems to be the part that has gotten a lot of comment. Two questions. Number one, could we put into that language to say, except for documented design exceptions? That's question number one. And question number two, what, you know, the developers have suggested they don't want to, you know, adopt a pig in a poke. They don't want to, you know, agree to a whole lot of stuff that they haven't seen yet or don't know all the details of. Would it make sense for us to wait to adopt this new standard until after the 60 days we've taken to, that Ryan mentioned? We're going to take some time and figure out how we're going to implement PROWAG. I believe that's what Ryan suggested, and do all of that together rather than having this now and that later. If the two are side by side, then everything is on the table and we can consider it all at once.
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, that's really the commission's decision. There's most certainly, for us to create any language on exception, I would most certainly want the time to be able to research and the consequences of that and develop specific language to that. In terms of the guidelines, those were really at your request at last week's meeting, the idea. And there's some, that most certainly I think the commission was supportive of that. And I think that's why staff is recommending that. If the commission wishes to adopt this policy change in conjunction with the guidelines, staff's most certainly happy to do that.
Seems to me that's the thing that the developers are asking for in any case. And there's lots of interested parties who want to see everything on the table all at once. And that makes sense to me. Final question, and I'm the one who made the suggestion of, you know, keeping some sort of database about when exceptions are made. Is that sort of thing doable without a lot of work? Or is that going to be something that creates a huge burden on the staff to keep track of?
It looks like it would be a burden.
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, we've never done anything like that. But I think Ryan's probably the best because you're welcome, Ryan. That would be him having to do it. But I think your idea is that, and the development community is that tracking would be developed over time. And as it developed over time, you would have greater input as to the how that section would be, PROAG would be applied. I don't think you would get any, great benefit at the front end of it, but I think it is something that could be done. Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions for Steve or staff at this point, or comments? Commissioner Hanson?
You said a lot, but it sounded like we could just, the suggested language of simply documenting exceptions, which is not complicated. And in fact, my understanding of the ADA is that the key is you document exceptions. And that protects the agency or even the private entity that has to comply with the ADA. You document what the exceptions are, and that covers it. So it seems to me and then later on we could come back with some more specific things as to how you document and all that. But it seems to me the straightforward language of let's accept for documented exceptions covers it. And then we could deal with all the rest in the future. But you don't have a problem with language except as documented exceptions, because we do that anyway.
Well, Madam President and Commissioner Hanson, I do have a problem because I haven't done enough legal background research on that to make sure that we can do that. And I would want to take the time. It's a fairly significant issue, and I'm all about drafting flexibility into our policy. I think it gives, there's so many situations, there's no silver bullet to any particular development or any circumstance in any of our projects. But I would like to take the time, and I appreciate Don Kostelix. He's most certainly very knowledgeable, but I would like to take the time to look at the law and both case and statutory and make sure that the district is okay. But I'm all about researching and coming back to you with the particular language. And Mr. Kostlik, and you very well may be right, that's it. I just don't feel comfortable before you today saying, yeah, let's do it.
And I want to just be a little devil's advocate here. And I think to your point, Steve, if we were to go down that path, if that's the will of the commission, I think that could be at odds with what we've already approved and adopted as PROAG, right? So is this policy going to be potentially at odds with the over-governance, of that we adopt PROAG, right? Which we've done for years. So I think I'm ultimately very comfortable with where we're at in terms of we've documented what type of flexibility we are going to be offering in terms of this catalog of other designs. It's really fairly common with lots of policy development that oftentimes when you get into the application of the policy, sometimes you just can't foresee what types of nuances need to be explained in greater detail, which would be part of that catalog. So I think we've demonstrated through the lengthening of this public comment period that we deliver on those commitments and working with our partners and coming up with those design guides that will help you. And we would continue to do so as part of that catalog if this policy or ordinance would be passed. So, and I think you're right, Steve, to be really cautious about just flippantly adding some language in here because this is a really important topic. So. Okay. Any other discussion at this time?
Madam President?
Commissioner McKinney?
Could we have Ryan come back up and just
Absolutely.
to ask a couple of questions? Thank
Commissioner
you.
McKinney.
Yes, Ryan, in your presentation, you indicated that over the next 60 days, your department will be preparing guidelines on the implementation of PROAG. Is that a correct understanding?
Correct.
Would it be conceivable, I mean, is there a big rush to approve this policy right now? Or if this policy were delayed till the end of those 60 days and we put it all together with the new guidelines that you're coming up with, would that cause us any particular problem? I mean,
Madam
the district as a
President,
whole.
Commissioner McKinney, whether you adopt this policy today or not, we will be implementing PROAG.
So it seems to me that if we want to have everything on the table, that we might as well look at it all at once and take care of it all at once, that there's not a great big rush to adopt these changes in this policy today. We can do it all at once, and 60 days from now seems to me just as good as a week or 2 weeks from now, or even today. So any thoughts on that?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, we are at your will to do what you would like to do with this policy. Ultimately, the Commission's given us direction to implement PROAG, and thus will be our action. There's some flexibility with regards to access management that's in here. I'll be very clear that in my direction to my team, and I know Christy, in working with her team, feels the same way, is that we try to provide as much flexibility where possible, because we know that the impact of development and the impact of any change should be to the benefit of the public, and so we try to make sure that that's always at the forefront, and providing the flexibility to accomplish that is what we do.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Anything, Commissioner Gold?
Yeah, thanks, Madam President. Well, I want to thank everybody for their comments, and want to thank staff, Ryan, and all the staff over there for all their efforts to really hear the concerns and work for a better outcome. I think that that's shown in this draft of the policy. As Ryan has stated, that this is part of the ADA transition plan. We have already committed to this. It's elsewhere in our policy. This kind of cohesively addresses that. There is flexibility in the policy. There's opportunity for concerns to be brought to the commission if they're not addressed. And this really alleviates future concern of doing something incorrectly and having to retrofit it and passing that burden to payers later on. So I just think that, and I appreciate City of Boise's comments and Council President Halliburton. I think that this is a really important policy that has stemmed from concerns from the development community as well as from partner agencies. And I think that staff has done a really thorough and great job addressing that. So I'm supportive of the policy as it's been presented and written, with the inclusion of the comments that Ryan presented at the beginning of the meeting from the City of Boise's recommendations.
Ken, do you mind putting that slide back up just so we have it for reference? Thank you, thank you. Okay, any other comments this time? Otherwise, we'll just have a motion. Commissioner Gold, do you want to, since you stated your support for it?
Yeah, so I would move to approve Ordinance 250, Access Management Policy, with the inclusion of the language. Should I read it or just to reference this slide?
By reference.
Okay.
Recommendations. Okay, great. So there's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion?
Madam President?
Commissioner McKinney?
I think we ought to, before accepting these specific items, the suggestions about section 7203.1, I think are pertinent. We ought to get input from our general counsel on those questions as he recommended before we take action on this. So I would be in favor of, and I would move as an alternative motion to defer approval of the access management policy changes until such time as the policy on PROAG has been prepared and completed by staff.
There's been a substitute motion. Is there a second? All right, guys, for lack of a second, back to the discussion.
So, Madam President, thanks Commissioner Gold. The question I had about whether we should add the suggested language to 7203.1 triggered a legal analysis, which I think is what Commissioner McKinney was concerned about. And since your motion doesn't include that, I think that makes sense. The nature of this policy change is we've been asking, please incorporate practices that we are currently doing into our policies. That's what our well-paid MIG consultants told us we should do. Incorporate policies of what you're doing. It's the most honest thing you can do to the public and everybody who relies on it. And this is what this is doing. I really appreciate that instead of just saying shall may, we have 11 pages in the access management policy that describes the nature of what the staff's flexibility is. They're using professional judgments, national best practices. It goes on and on and on describing what those are, and which is far preferable to me than just simply saying, just have a one-sentence paragraph that says, you may use your discretion, but don't tell us how you're going to do it. This actually is the kind of accountability the public has been asking for. And I appreciate that our staff has been doing very, very well. And it shouldn't be a secret that we've been following best practices. And as a result, protecting the assets, the public assets. We're not going to be sued because we're saying one thing and doing another. I just want to point out the P in PROAG stands for public. And so the public has access in the public right away. And the G in PROAG is for guidance. It doesn't say mandates. It's not pro-WAM, it's pro-WAG. And that's why our staff has been so effectively using that. I really appreciate that we made the assumption that our advisory groups were all getting the same information at the same time, but they weren't. So I always appreciate staff taking the time. What are the specific examples that some of the folks who might be concerned about this, and we heard a specific example about T intersections, for example, got addressed. We heard some other examples and they got addressed. So as examples come up, I have no doubt whatsoever they'll be addressed. And not moving on this because there's some possibility of some examples in the future that haven't been specified coming up at a later date just doesn't make sense to me. And I really do believe that it's appropriate, since we're already doing this, not to go backwards and then adopt something that is or not adopt something that is inconsistent with what we're doing. So I think this is a really good step forward, and we continue. I really appreciate that the request, actually, Commissioner McKinney made the request about being specific about those design guides and then posting them on the website in language that ordinary people can understand. What are those all about? We're going to do, and that's part of the motion, that's going to happen. So the suggestion I think Commissioner McKinney made last week was very well taken, and that's why I'm glad it's incorporated into this. And I'm glad we're moving forward on this. And I really do hope that as we look at the other sections of our policies, that our friends, especially in the development community, say, you know, I wish the policy had more flexibility, like on parking minimums, on parking requirements, on other things, road widths, that you come and add that flexibility under those things, because I would like to see that applied consistently throughout the rest of our policy section. So that's why I'm very glad that we're finally able to vote on this.
Thanks, Commissioner Hanson. I think I don't need to be super lengthy, but I also just want to say thanks to staff. Thanks for everyone who's taking the time to testify, write letters, show up, who are committed and part of our advisory committees. This process is definitely, I think as a commission and as an agency, we've learned because we haven't delved a lot into policy changes, right? So as a result of this and your patience and willingness to communicate with us about what doesn't work in terms of how we actually get here has improved the process, and we're going to be applying this process to the rest of our, policy conversation. So I think that as a process evaluation piece, that's an important thing to call out, and I want to thank folks for that. I also just very much in support of this policy change. I think by taking more time, by consulting other partners, we have made it better. We're already doing this work. I think it just states to that fact. And I think really ultimately, like what's been shared before, this whole policy topic came up as a part of just trying to work with our city partners and seeing how we can best serve them. What are those consistent challenges that we're facing, especially under the guise of safety? So I think that this is, and again, like any policy change, if there's some hangups, folks still have the opportunity to come to us. We can work through those. We can always adjust it as necessary. So this doesn't mean that this is, by opening this up, we're also trying to strengthen the muscle of us having those policy conversations so that it isn't 10 or 15 years when this is, we're trying to revise this policy again if we need to. It's something that can happen on a more frequent basis as needed. And as the designs or standards or the will of our communities and builders shift and change to meet the needs of our communities. So with that, any other comments at this time? Discussion? Okay. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay. Steve, did you have anything else to add on that bit? Are we good? No? Okay. Sounds good. All right. So motion carries. We're going to move into.
Excuse me. This is an ordinance.
I know, that's why I was asking Steve.
Takes 4 votes.
So,
to come up.
Madam President,
Since
since there were 3 votes, this reflects the policy of the agency. So it's a reflection of the policy of the agency. It takes 1 more vote in order to get it incorporated into the ordinance, but is still a reflection of the policy of the agency.
Which nobody's argued with at all.
Well, Madam President, for us to change our policy, excuse me, commissioners, currently the access management policy is been adopted by ordinance, and to change that, it takes an ordinance to change that. Any ordinance of the district, as we all know, requires a supermajority, which is 4 out of 5. So the passage of ordinance 250 has failed.
So, but Steve, in terms of how this reflects the actual mechanics of adopting what is the will of the commission at this point, there is a reflection of that. Isn't that correct? In policy as a resolution.
Well, Madam President, if the commission desires to come back with a formal resolution to adopt an interim policy, that can be done by simple majority, yes. But that cannot happen today. It would take a separate resolution.
Why not?
That's not the guidance that you gave me previously.
That is, and I'm sorry for the confusion. There was no resolution before the commission today. The only thing before the commission was an ordinance. And if you're happy, if the commission's will is to come back with a resolution as an interim policy change and have it adopted, absolutely. But it takes a formal action to adopt a resolution.
Well, Madam President, given that, I also was under the mistaken impression that we could address a policy change and it reflect the policy changes at the same time. I would ask that this be placed on the agenda next week as a resolution to adopt the access management policy. It's called policy, but I realize that in the past, future commission's hands have now been tied to add this cumbersome layer in order to the majority policy proposals of the commission's hands have been tied. So we need to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and that in all future proposed changes to ordinance also have a resolution to have a policy change so that we can vote on both at the same time. I think it does a disservice to the people who have made the effort to try and come here and testify and expect closure, to us to say, well, no, we're going to come back at some future date. You have to come back again. So I would ask that this be placed before us as a resolution.
Madam President, that's not a problem.
Okay, Commissioner Hanson. Okay. All right. Well, moving on to public communications. Is there anyone that would like to address the commission at this time? Sure.
Thanks, commissioners. I didn't want to raise it during the discussion, but the issue was brought up by the developers in the room that there had been a discussion that they were involved with related to ADA compliance and T intersections. And in hearing that, I was reaching out via various messaging to the ADA advisory committee members that I know, and they were not part of that discussion. And so I think in the spirit of committees being involved, I don't think one committee should have most favored committee status, especially when it's an ADA issue related to T intersections. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
I believe Mr. Wardle brought that to us as strictly as an example. Nothing having to do with, pardon?
Anyway.
That was all. It was nothing as onerous as what you just described.
Okay, thank you. All right, so with that, meeting is adjourned. We have a work session. We're going to take 10 minutes to break, so we'll be back at 1:45. We're back. It's now 1:46. We've got, for the first thing on our post-commission agenda is a work session on the fiscal year 2024-25 budget final draft work session. Ms. Christine Tandler.
Christine Tandler, Budget Manager. So, just going to go over the changes that have been made to the budget since at the last couple times, and then lastly we'll go over at the end of the week. So, beginning of the memo, just one prior draft. So I did remove a paralegal from the legal budget and out external services budget. That is reflected in there. Also, I added funding for ped bike counters at the request of our planning to continue that initiative. Purchased, I think, 3 or 4 this year, so I want to continue that over the next couple years. We also removed a planning position from development services, which will be evaluated in the next year. And I had erroneously put 6 GEO positions in the USTIC budget, but because they're for brooms, they're for sweeping, they needed to be in the Adams budget. So the total number of FTEs with regards to maintenance stayed the same. I just changed which department they're shown in because that's where they will charge their time. So with those adjustments, we are in FY24 at 231.8. The remaining pages of the memo are a repeat of what you've seen prior as far as planning decisions and items set forth in the threshold or in the proposed budget, excuse me. The next steps being that Friday I will send the publication, which we'll review. I need to send it to the paper on Friday by noon to ensure that we meet our publication requirements per statute for the public hearing that's on August 23rd. So, memo, I will go to the 1-page document, and it's just all statutorily required, where it is, when it is, what time the public hearing is, goes through and shows what our proposed budget is. We are required to publish the commissioner's budgeted salaries, and note that they do include a proposed COLA for $23.73 a month, and then for the president and for the president $28.52. Excuse me. So with that, I will stand for any.
I have, Madam President.
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
I don't have any questions, but I'd like you to do one thing so that we can have a discussion about it on our hearing night, and that is to put $5 million from somewhere into sidewalk gap projects. And we can discuss the fact that the low-hanging fruit is gone and what we might have to do in the way of maybe even right-of-way purchase or utility movements or anything like that to go forward with more of these projects.
Commissioners, for the record, Paul Daigle, Chief of Staff. Commissioner, I'd like to point out that as the budget increases every year, the sidewalk budget automatically increases. This year, it's already gone from 5 to 8. So we've already taken into account some of that just by virtue of the fact that the budget increases.
But is that is it under community programs or a
Yes.
separate line item?
It's under community programs.
Okay.
Now, if you look at, in addition to community programs, you have a core, which is this year, $8 million. You also have vehicle registration fees and some of the other things you add to it. Over the next 5 years, you're spending $75 million on sidewalks. So we do have an awful lot of money programmed for that will be able to do exactly what you're
I
saying.
understand, but it's not happening fast enough for me. That's why I'm asking for this.
Right away takes time, sir. I mean, it does.
I understand.
So-
The longer we wait, the longer it's gonna take.
What I'm saying is I don't need to add money to the budget. I've got it there for you to use. I don't need to add any more. I have it. Adding more money is not gonna help me with the time. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, whatever it takes to get it up to an additional 5 million from over last year, maybe it's only 2 million new. That's what I like to see happen, and make it a additional, a line item that's much more clear than it has been.
What is more clear than community programs?
Sidewalk gap.
That's what Sir, we'll change the name of community programs to sidewalk.
No, I didn't ask for that.
No, but that's what community programs is for, the sidewalk gaps.
It's also
Safe
for
routes to
100
school.
other things.
Safe routes to school. I mean, we'll do it, sir.
We can just have this discussion amongst
Madam
ourselves.
President.
I'd like to suggest something.
Commissioner Gold.
Yeah, just one other question related to this, I think, is are the rapid implementation projects also under the community programs line item?
Madam President, Commissioner Gold, give me one moment, please. Madam President, Commissioner Gold, I believe that those are under the program of traffic and safety. I can get a 2023. Rapid repair, yes, it's under traffic safety and operations. And currently in FY24, programmed right now $750,000. Again, that is an item that we've already planned on, and we know adjusted as we go through those projects and as they come out, but that's at least to get us a level of effort started so that we can begin projects. And then as we go through the year and those projects fully vetted and able to do through the process, we can adjust that budget as necessary.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Commissioner Hanson.
Madam President, I think it would behoove the commission to continue the discussion. Don't worry about this, Christine. It's within the budget. I approve the posting because it's capital facilities, boom, total capital projects, maintenance, overhead, planning, development, technical services. So I think it's ready to go forward. And we can do these through budget adjustments, but it would be good to have additional clarity. I just think that planning and development services have done a great job of integrating more sidewalks into more programs. But it's also crosswalks, ramps, chicanes, and other facilities, because it's a one and done approach. We go in there, we don't just build a sidewalk. If there's speeding, we also address speed. We try to address speeding. If there's other issues that need to be resolved, and it's particularly important because some of the capital maintenance projects that we've had, where we just had federal capital maintenance money to repave, we didn't actually address sidewalk gaps. We did ped ramps. And so this is doing more of it. And quite frankly, it's in those old neighborhoods, many of which I represent, where we're finally getting some. And it's still a very small portion of the overall capital budget. But what I would like to see, and this is my question, I think you can pass it on to Ryan, but maybe you could deal with it, is I really am glad that the staff has moved forward addressing the rapid implementation projects. Because building a concrete sidewalk is oftentimes, it means it takes a while. Right away, it takes a while to acquire. Sometimes you have to do a lot of negotiating with the neighbors because they don't realize that's actually not their property. It's right away that's owned by the public. So there's a long process. In the meantime, people don't have a safe place to walk. Then they're speeding down the road. But our rapid implementation project, I really, really appreciate it. We now have people driving on portions of Boise Avenue because we went in and redid some of the painting and took out a turning lane that was used as a passing lane. We have some movement in a couple of other neighborhoods. Those were with rapid implementation projects. I would like to see that pool big enough so that we can do more of those. And the goal is so that people feel safe on their streets, ultimately. And if it's an extruded curb with asphalt, because we don't, in order to protect people with maybe some vertical elements. In the meantime, before we can build a sidewalk, that's the pool we take it out of, and we make those connections. So there's lots and lots of ways. Now that we know what a chicane looks like on a whole stretch of a street, there's temporary chicanes, which we could use with rapid implementation money, which are not made of concrete. They're actually attached to the asphalt, but they do the same thing. They force drivers to drive the speed limit so kids feel safe walking and biking in their own neighborhoods. So that's where I'd like to see us. I really like that we've put more money. It's really about livable streets, making the street the way it should have been built when it was first built 100 years ago or 50 years ago. And so that's where I'd like us to see, and I'd like a little more information about how can we enhance that tool with 83 projects that happened this year and 74 more in the works. It's great. And more neighborhoods deserve that. And I don't know how to shift those around. I'm happy to shift that out of some gigantic capital expansion projects somewhere. And I don't know that that's what Commissioner Goldthorpe is suggesting. We take it out of, widening 10 Mile and putting it over to fill some sidewalks in my neighborhood, which is fine. But the integrated approach, we didn't take that integrated approach on Division. We did fill sidewalk gaps, but in the process, we pushed the radius of the view site on Division wider, and now we're getting requests for speed humps on Division. Because people used to, where there weren't sidewalks, would walk in the street, and now they're off to the side. And so, in fact, if we'd have done it today, we probably would have designed it differently. We'd add curb extensions, but now we have to now retrofit with perhaps some chicanes, which would be nice, or something else. But in the meantime, those rapid implementation, I'd like to see more money into that rapid implementation. And I don't know what item that's under, but they basically are the kind of things that make an immediate impact to a neighborhood that feels unsafe.
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, I will note that with that, so the $750,000 that's currently in the FY24 budget, because it's one of those things that we're just kind of starting out and trying to get our arms around, is shown in the capital budget. As the capital budget is broken out, which will be reflected in the packet that I will send out and will be available for public comment on Monday. Will show that category of traffic safety and operations. I will tell you that through the budgeting process, in as recent as late July, we have 2 ped crossings that were originally scheduled to be capital projects, one at Colt, and I can't remember where the other was, but they were moved to rapid implementation projects that we were able to then get done in-house quicker. And so that is, again, that is the correlation and the integration between DTS and planning. It's continuing to happen. Thank you.
I guess, Commissioner Goldthorpe, do you have a response to any of this?
No, I don't care what we call it. I just want to get it done.
So are you saying that this is getting it done, or do you think that there's do you have additional thoughts about it? Well, more in line with what you're expecting?
It's like Jim said, there are tons of places in some of these older, no sidewalks, not even a little temporary asphalt facility like we put in around Cloverdale and Amity and Lake Hazel and all those places. And those I think we can do. In fact, I know we can. And if we have to buy a little right of way, so be it. We can do it now. And if we're going to improve the street, like I'll give you a specific example. We've got a large project going on Amity between Maple Grove and Eagle Road. It's not scheduled to be completed until 2028. I don't see any reason why, knowing what we do about the width of the road, that we can't put something temporary in place for kids to stay safe instead of another 7-year-old kid being killed by somebody on their damn phone texting. That's all.
Madam President?
Commissioner McKinney?
I think, and most of these subjects that are being discussed at the moment are kind of beside the point of what we're looking at now. I'm ready to move that we adopt the draft budget for publication.
Just a head nod is fine, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, the rest
I
of
do,
it's just part of that.
Madam
Oh, so
President.
it's done. Yeah. I see.
Madam President, Commissioners, I do have one last question. With the Commission's direction to increase property tax certification by new construction roll only, which is similar to what we did last year. Last year, we also did the resolution to take the 3% and add it to our foregone balance. I just need to know if that's the will of the Commission to add that to our foregone balance so that I can have legal draft that resolution or not.
Madam President, I would approve that.
We might as well. Yeah, we should.
Okay. All right, I appreciate you.
Thanks, Christine. Anything else on this item? All right, well, we're push out the speed management policy final draft discussion for another week or so. We'll be back. And with that, have a great day, and we'll see you next week.